Good. Good to go, Itai.
Okay, good. Welcome, everybody. I'm excited, very excited to welcome you to this Public Africa Seminar Series, hashtag number 6, especially because this is our first public engagement after a 2-week break. As Yuma, we're really, really excited to have you join us for this interesting session. Today, my name is Itai Makone, and I welcome you to this session. The co-convener of this seminar series is my colleague Ibrahim Niang. He convenes the French session, and he is also part of this published Africa Seminar series. My 2 other colleagues, Job Maura and Yusra Hamdawi, are also they are curating a podcast series with the same ethos and aim to strengthen African publishing in Africa. They're also part of this project. This project is mainly it's actually entitled Strengthening Academic African Publishing and Dissemination. And the goal of the project is to find out the challenges of what African scholarly publishing are and to come up with ways and mechanisms to strengthen African publishing. And this initiative is a collaboration between the University of Cape Town, another Institute of Humor, and LASPART at Gastonberg University in Senegal. And this project is funded by the Open Society Foundation, and we're grateful for their funding to kick off this project. Today, we have a very special guest in our midst, a veteran in publishing. I'm very excited to be hosting him today. And I would like our director at Yuma, Divine, to introduce our guest today. Divine.
Thank you, Itai. And thank you, colleagues, for being here. Sorry, I'm wearing a mask because we have people working in the same room. We have an internet failure today, so we're having that fixed right now. But it's my pleasure to be welcoming Mzee Walter Bgoya, who is the managing director of Cooking and Nyota Publishers in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. Cooking and Nyota is celebrating 40 years of publishing this year under the watchwords relevant books, beautiful books, affordable books. Mzee Walter is a household name, but he's also an institution in itself and also an archive. If you worked in the publishing and knowledge production sector on the continent, or questions related to the continent, African studies, producing knowledge, thinking about the future of scholarly publishing, you would definitely have come across Walter. And the work that they have done in establishing institutions and networks such as the Africa Book Collective, and also thinking about challenges of publishing, on the African continent. Walters and Zay Walters belongs to a very big generation of elders who have really done a lot of work, to build and bring a new generation of scholars. I was in Rhodesia in the last years when Walter was leading the board of the Africa Book Collective, but doing everything, to ensure that there is a continuity in building a new generation of some of us who would continue to champion what he and Mary J and others had begun, and trying to make African knowledge visible to the world, and also giving value, to African knowledge. He's got lots of stories and about his own experience, his own working and the publishing sector in Tanzania itself, but building his own publishing house and also championing this knowledge, across, across the world also. But in his life, his purpose has been especially not just to give visibility, but over the past years, he's championed building intellectual histories, giving a series where he's building autobiographies of top people, top politicians, top scholars, but also the work that he and the Nkuki Nyanyota have been doing now in publishing in what we call indigenous languages. But he's publishing currently in Swahili, one of the few doing that work. And it is important, to acknowledge a group of people who we think are giving worth to the work of decolonization. So Walter is here today, and we are really happy to have him and privileged to have him in our midst. Like Walter started off by saying that I owe him a lot. I owe him a lot, not just answering emails, but also continuing with the work that he asked us to continue on this project on African scholarly publishing. Falls within the framework of some of the ideas that he, Mary J, and others, started. So thank you for the privilege of being here and the honor of you do by speaking within this space. And we are looking forward to hearing, about your, what you're going to tell us. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much, Divine. Walter, before I hand over to Walter, I'm sorry, colleagues and everyone in the room, you might find that you'll be able to probably unmute yourself or to type something in the chat box. It's because the institution has asked us to secure the room. Once secure our Zoom. Once the room is secure, we will the settings will be changed, and you'll be allowed to type your questions in the chat box for Walter or raise your hand and give your questions to Walter. And with that, I hand over to Walter. Thank you so much for your time, Walter. You can go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Divine, and thank you very much, Itai and the Institute for inviting me to participate in your seminar and to make some presentation. It is 9 o'clock where I am in Texas, and I have not had my breakfast. So trust me, my presentation will be short. I also want to say that this is not a formal paper I'm presenting. It is a quick draft I did so that I could manage the time I've been given more efficiently. I've written, by the way, a great deal about publishing, not only as an academic, but as a practicing publisher, with great luck for always meeting interesting people and learning from them. I've read several biographies of famous publishers, a practice that is not popular with some of my colleagues in the publishing industry, who lament the absence of the reading habit among Tanzanians and Africans in general, when they themselves do not read. As chairman of African Books Collective and the Norma Award for Publishing in Africa, I had the fortune of working for many years with extraordinary people committed to African publishing and with great knowledge of the workings of the publishing industry in the North and South. I also worked with the great African publishers, members of the Council of Management and the Norma, and enjoyed great camaraderie. And yes, wine too, I must say, learning from one another and bouncing ideas and confiding in one another. That way, I've avoided thinking I was alone and that we were reinventing the wheel. From my reading, I've been able to see that the problems of publishing that we're experiencing were experienced by earlier publishers elsewhere in the world. In our case, at Nkuki Nyanyota, I am not being perhaps too immodest to say we're making some contribution to publishing, even as we recognize that is not to be taken as the indicator of the general health of the industry in Tanzania. There was recently a clip that went viral showing a bookshop in Johannesburg standing untouched in the rubble and destruction from looting. In some quarters, it was received with some glee. In my view, it was the sad fact that before culture, persons must eat. The problem, in my view, was not absence of reading or certainly not lack of respect for books, but really lack of food. Now, the topic of my presentation, limitations to what an African publisher could do if money were not a problem, is a continuation of my search for an appropriate response to an offer I was asked to consider a year ago. What would our company do if we had all the money we wanted? I gave what I thought was a simple and straightforward answer. We would do more and better of the publishing that we currently do under the watchwords, relevant books, beautiful books, affordable books, by bringing in additional editors, purchasing the latest publishing IT equipment and employing skilled operators, working to mitigate other internal impediments in order to publish more professionally, the right books at the right time, which would translate into better profits. My answer did not appear to satisfy my interlocutor. It was not impressive enough. I should think big, I was told. Something like turn your company into a big publishing corporation, a Pan-African one, with the potential to have a significant impact on the continent. Now, despite my skepticism about such a manner following on us, I've spent some time to think about what unlimited funding would mean to us and to other African publishers. And here are a few ideas and reflections. Let me be clear. Money is important, very important. And African publishing companies are seriously undercapitalized. We could certainly use more money to improve and even possibly revolutionize our publishing. But with 49 years of hindsight, I'm convinced that other factors over and above money are the real determinants of success or failure in the African publishing industry. Money and finance may be prime factors for success in rich countries with the developed publishing industries, with the reservoirs of professionals in all aspects of publishing and management. Combining money capital with skilled human capital is what optimizes a publishing company's productivity and pushes its growth forward. And both, sadly, are in very short supply for most African indigenous publishers. Decisions about whether to invest in a given title, how much to invest, in how many titles a year over periods of 1, 3, 5 years or more, how many copies to print of each of the titles, so on, would be more easily arrived at if there was adequate knowledge of the market for each of the planned books. In developed publishing countries, there are statistics about the book trade stretching back decades and even centuries. Estimates of disposable incomes of different segments of society, newspapers, magazines to discuss, to review, to recommend, to accept or serialize and to advertise in, to create interest in a book or a series of books. But as all publishers know, there's no guarantee that a book will sell in the numbers projected, even with the best research by the most efficient and financially rich publishing corporation. Otherwise, there would be no remaindering and pulping of millions of books that happens every year in European countries, USA, Canada, and Australia. With no money problem and with starry-eyed optimism, printing tens of thousands of books because money is not a problem, and expecting to sell all of them will no time make money you a real problem. African publishing entrepreneurs invariably invest in textbooks for the obvious reason that they are the only books that have a known market and data about them is readily available. Yet no matter how well capitalized, with the exception of a few countries where local publishing is owned by local capitalists with political clout and have leveled the playing field and given the multinationals a run for their money, Kenya is a good example. African publishers' major obstacles will be the ruthless competition from British, French, and US multinationals, and is one that they will not easily overcome. In addition to the long history of accumulating knowledge and refining publishing strategies and technical skills, and I also mean data tricks, they carry with them the unacknowledged but real authority that neocolonialism imposes on aid-dependent countries, especially in the education sectors. They wield enormous influence in the corridors of education ministries, local governments, and funding agencies. For decades, we African publishers complained about the unethical practice of these multinational companies that manipulated textbook procurement processes that resulted in the domination of the education book market. We were consistently dismissed as incompetent crybabies who were afraid of competition. It wasn't until 2010 that two British publishing giants, Macmillan Limited and Oxford University Press East Africa and OUP Tanzania, were censored by the World Bank for corruption in cases in South Sudan and Tanzania, and fined 11 million pounds in the case of Macmillan and 1.9 million respectively by the UK fraud, serious fraud office in respect of OUP. How many billions they made in the 40 to 60 years of African independence is a big part of how much African countries lost. A relevant example of how Europe underdeveloped Africa, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. Yet if their influence was only at the end of the book procurement chain and only in financial terms, it could be argued that the practice could be easily brought to an end almost by simple administrative decisions. But it goes further than that. They directly and indirectly manipulate local institutions and officials to shape educational curricula and educational policy directions, the effects of which are long-term and whose consequences are evident today, 64 years after Ghana's independence, with most countries still following British and French curricula, patched here and there to make them appear national. In Tanzania, for instance, it has been proven by researchers that the inertia propping up the decision to resist using Swahili as a language of instruction and to maintain the hegemony of English is not only due to the persuasion of local politicians and bureaucrats, The pro-English lobby has its powerful and well-resourced external supporters. These fear that a decision by Tanzania to liberate its education from its neo-colonial clutches would lead to a loss of the pedestal on which the preference for everything British in education and other intellectual pursuits is perched. This is one of the limitations to what a Pan-African publisher could do, even if money were not a problem. But lest I appear to be one-sided, too one-sided, let me also recognize that these multinational companies are good and great publishers in their own rights, in their own countries. How could they not be, after 258 years in the case of Macmillan and 435 years in the case of OUP, traversing centuries of publishing in all branches of knowledge? This criticism is therefore not about their publishing and their indisputable contribution to creation and spread of knowledge for the benefit of those that are interested in all branches of learning. It's about their practices in African and other developing countries. It is also not a case for shunning them or even shying away from cooperation with them if it is based on mutual benefit. It is a case of knowing who you are dealing with. An entrepreneur, African publisher, who may decide to go in a different direction from textbooks and invest in other genres of publishing will face different but no fewer daunting challenges. Herein, I believe, are the fundamental imponderable conditions of African publishing. The publisher entering the field soon finds that the market for the books he or she assumed to exist because of what they perceive to be clear need does not in reality exist. Demand is only real when it is effective, when it is supported by purchasing power. And even with that, there has to be a desire, a willingness, nay, a drive by individuals and collectively by society to improve their living conditions, to recognize that books are purveyors of knowledge and cultural capital that enables the introduction and success of other transformative strategies at personal and social levels. The never-ending litany of Africans having no reading culture has only recently been put under scrutiny. Take, for an example, a minimum wage earner in Tanzania who makes 150,000 shillings a month, which is about $70 US. To buy a daily tabloid newspaper for 1,000 shillings, which is about 40 American cents, would mean spending 20% of his or her salary on that item alone. A decent children's book in Tanzania costs 5,000 shillings, which is nearly 4% of the minimum wage. Would an individual in the rich north spend 20% of their monthly wage to subscribe to a daily newspaper for a month, or pay 5% of their wages to buy one children's book? And mark you, there are occupations where the minimum wage is officially set at as low as 80,000 shillings, or about $34.50. And there are many employers who often refuse to pay even this miserly wage and can get away with because in a situation of mass unemployment, any pay, no matter how small, is better than nothing. There is yet the category of illiterates. I only discovered this word recently. Those who earn enough and even high incomes, but who are not interested in reading. This leaves a very small percentage of the population to support an industry that depends on regular publication of new books on diverse subjects in the hope that some of them will do well enough to keep our company afloat. So, what's to be made of this situation? what are the prospects for African publishing industries given such circumstances as they prevail in Tanzania? And I do not imagine they are the worst on the continent. There are two perspectives on this. The first one is that at the present, material and subjective conditions in all but a few African countries do not exist to make publishing viable, and that any attempt to pursue it will only lead to bankruptcy and pain. This is the explanation for publishers only being interested in textbook publishing. The argument is that for a publishing industry to develop, certain conditions must be present. A reasonable level of economic development that's constantly improving, a high level of literacy, and as already stated, a strong desire on the part of the populace to uplift their lives through reading. With the exception of the last condition, the others, of course, in my view, depend on the state. The second perspective is that this view is too deterministic and disempowering, banking on an uncertain future where all the stated conditions will be in place. They argue that this only encourages and justifies publishers' reluctance to venture forth. Conditions for change do not have neat calendar dates on which they appear. Change happens because agents of change are at work. The struggle advances only in the process of struggle. I think there is merit in the view that it is the responsibility of the state, without excluding private contributions in different ways, to create reading publics. It should be responsible to bring about convergence of factors such as continuing investment in long-term quality education, industries that support cultural productions, paper manufacturing, for instance, print technologies, universities for research and skills development, as well as financial institutions to finance and support nascent publishing industries. I should now make some comments on scholarly publishing, while sticking to the main theme of the discussion, limitations to what an African publisher could do if money were not a problem. The same observations I made already apply here, particularly if the publisher is an independent one, such as we are, and are not a university press, or even for that matter, a research institute, such as your own. In our own experience, there are some distinct advantages to scholarly publishing. There is a local market, albeit small, and it is easy to identify it. It commands considerable purchasing power. It operates in English, an international language, which makes it possible to outsource skills within the continent and internationally. Technology is driving new modes of thinking about what to publish, which model to apply, and while being grounded locally, its market is not limited to local universities and other institutions of higher learning. African Books Collective facilitates access to international markets in a way that a single publisher would find hard to develop. Networks of like-minded scholars and publishers have the potential to expand the scope of cooperation, each publisher is leveraging individual strengths and advantages with those of others, creating synergies to the advantage of the community of scholars. In 2016, with the support of ABC and the International Africa Institute, I was involved together with Dr. Toby Green of Cambridge University at an African Studies Association meeting in Cambridge in an initiative that argued for balanced co-publication arrangements between African and UK and US university presses. After all, Northern scholars are doing research in Africa, but books emanating from those research projects are not made available in Africa. And when available, they are sold at prices that academic communities and individual interested parties in Africa can hardly afford. Often, it excludes access for the research collaborators in Africa and their own libraries. That initiative led to a statement agreed upon by authors and publishers in the US and UK African Studies Associations to avail African publishers rights to publish their books in Africa and to pay no more than $300 for those rights. They further agreed to offer freely PDFs from which to print the African editions. This was a good step in promoting North-South publishing cooperation. The partners, ABC and IAI, have now established a freely accessible database of publishers in Africa with the details of publishing lists, languages, etc., to assist such ethical cooperation. Somehow, it appears easier for independent publishers such as ourselves to co-publish with Northern counterparts than it is for African university presses. At the same time, admitting sadly that this cooperation is not taking place within the continent where it should be the norm. If there are steps being taken in that direction by institutions like your own, I'm afraid not adequately publicized. In the 1970s, Nigeria had vibrant university presses because they were well funded. Although I think there's a bit of exaggeration in this. If a press can only publish 8 to 9 books a year, one begins to wonder how vibrant it is. Why they collapsed has been attributed to several reasons. One is, of course, federal funds dried up, which is the petrol questions of lack of financial sustainability. Academics and not publishing professionals were being appointed to manage the presses. And the worst of all, of course, was the criminal World Bank, IMF structure adjustment programs of the 80s that decimated African economies and universities. All African presses suffered the same fate, with the exception of South African universities with a long history of state support for academic publishing. Nigerian presses are said to be coming up again, and the creation of regional and continental networks is being suggested as a possible strategy to strengthen the African university presses. I don't think this is going to be easy. Publishing houses are driven by competition, oftentimes, by the way, unreasonably so. Publishing CEOs are not experts at compromise, not within their companies and not with other publishers. This is a weakness that undermines African publishers' collective bargaining with government authorities for better policies on for better policies on publishing. But despite the many years that we've been arguing for coming together, this hasn't happened. Or it happens only in really very few countries. And I've given the example of Kenya as one interesting country where this Publishers Association is very strong and is able to secure from government good conditions for doing business. One disincentive of cooperation among African university presses across national boundaries is the absence of common university curricula, not even on a limited number of subjects. If there existed such a requirement of common textbooks and other reading materials for universities in the region, it would incentivize publishers to work together. Joint publications would lead to skills sharing, collaboration among authors of academic texts, cost sharing of pre-press and printing, and higher print runs, thereby lowering book prices. Unfortunately, that too does not appear to be forthcoming anytime soon, despite common regional political and economic groupings such as SADC, ECOWAS, and of course, the African Union itself. At the same time, there is a lot of research and new thinking about university presses being driven by technological innovations and what are termed novel institutional logics, such as, for example, shifting from product-oriented to market-oriented publishing. I am probably missing something here, but these energies appear to me to be directed at funding for solutions for enclaves of scholarly publishers and research centers, rather than a solution for making scholarship accessible to the thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands, thousands of young African students in universities who need books. Take the example of one of these technologies, the espresso book machine, which Divine asked me to speak about, and I shall do that if it comes up in questions, because we do own, incredibly, the only EBM on the whole continent, which is kind of strange. Now, this technology was the logical response to the crisis of book oversupply in the global north. As more and more books are published and printed, and the number of readers and the number of books they buy remains the same, publishers cannot avoid huge losses due to overstocking. The only logical response is to print fewer books. Even then, there are still too many titles of books being published in those countries. And for the reader, choosing what to buy and read has already become a difficult and even frustrating task. One major European publisher has written to the effect that most books today are selling only to the authors and publishers communities. In other words, friends are buying friends' books. Reviewers are reviewing friends' book, manuscript, and so on. Given this situation, it was only a matter of time before inventors saw the opportunity to develop a printing technology that could print a few copies at a time at much lower cost than using conventional presses. In our case, on the other hand, it is not because there are too many books being produced annually that we need to produce fewer. our crisis of a different nature. It is the crisis of low demand, which in turn forces publishers to produce few books, which in turn makes books very expensive. University students in the North are not affected by this situation. Millions of books are still being produced for students. Research centers are well funded to be able to afford all the books and journals they require in print and digitally. What our universities need are thousands of books, millions of books that are affordable. University presses should therefore not be looking to become commercially successful, because that only leads to abandoning the objective of the press, which is to publish books that advance new knowledge and not books that sell well to make a profit, even if those books depart from the basis of university press publishing. Scholarly or academic publishing has its own peculiar questions about what to publish. There are questions such as to peer review or not to peer review, as a result of questions around current practices, some of them plainly driven by prejudice and Western intellectual arrogance. The late Walter Rodney rejected the idea that his book was going to be submitted to a reviewer, arguing that the intellectual and academic traditions from which the reviewer came from were the ones that had been responsible for justifying Europe's underdevelopment of Africa. There's also the homogenization of what passes for scholarship that one writer has labeled as the increasing unintelligibility of intellectual writers, blame for which is placed on growing institutions of higher education. And career academics. Now, these questions represent real dilemmas and need to be understood and kept in view as scholarly publishers aim to bring out the best of African thought and learning. The decision about what to publish should by all means be based primarily on considerations of value of scholarship. For fully funded university presses should be the only criteria. And in any case, good scholarly books will sell better than bad ones. So they have got an incentive to do good books. Other aspects of publishing, book design, attractive covers, marketing, and distribution are equally important in generating and nurturing a market, boosting publisher profile, and enhancing the bottom line. For independent scholarly publishers such as ourselves, financial success is clearly the most accepted consideration, but it is not the only one. Antoine Gallimard, the grandson of the famous French publisher Gaston Gallimard, who boasted that la littérature française, c'est moi, French literature is me, taking a leaf from the French Louis XIV, who say, l'état c'est moi, the state is me, remarked in one interview that if a publisher is too much an entrepreneur, then they are not a good publisher. But you are too much of a publisher, this can be dangerous. In other words, the question was to strike a balance between being a good publisher and a good entrepreneur. I've now and again been asked why I've been in publishing this long, given what they hear in my tone of speech and interpret as pessimism. My answer has always been, it is not pessimism, it is realism you are hearing from me. The mere fact that I've been long in this precisely argues against the position that I'm a pessimist. Within that realistic position, one works under no illusion, and one understands the implications and stands ready for all outcomes. One must at any rate, at all times retain the will and the integrity to stay on course. Publishing is about being alive, listening, reading, learning, following directions of movements of ideas, and working with those shaping the thinking of the people, and placing yourself and your institution to give voice to the progressive ones. Which is why, coming back to our question, what would we do if money were not a problem? It is now my turn to ask, from where would this money be coming? What would be the conditions attached to this money? Would it be given annually till the source questions our publishing program or our ideological orientation? Would the giver of the money also be sponsoring a demonstration aimed at overthrowing the Cuban government, the Cuban Revolution? Would the giver of the money accept our using the money to shift away from publishing in English to publishing exclusively in Swahili? Many questions. Now, if those questions were to be answered in a way that made me feel there was common understanding of what needs to be done, and the expectations were based on steadily building on previous year's success and lessons, including lessons from failure, then by all means I would say, when do we sign an agreement? I also hope you will help me answer the question, what would you do if money were not a problem? Thank you. We can stop here, and if you have some questions and have some time, I'll try and answer them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Walter. It is very interesting to listen to you. You touched on many aspects of publishing. You talked about like multinationals, university publishers, independent publishers. You actually have a wealth of experience, and we could touch on every single part and offer your advice and offer your critical insights. I usually use my monopoly to my advantage to ask first, but today I'll be very generous and I'll let people ask their questions. So I'm going to read out the 2 questions in the chat that I have for you, Walter. Let me read out the first one. So I'll give you 2 questions and then you can answer while people are still reacting to your talk. The first one is from Marco, and the question reads, how do you see the situation or future of audiobooks in Africa? And that's the first question. And then the second question, if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hands or type them in the chat box. Okay. And then the second question is from Brian Wafawa, and he says, publishers like Mkuki Nanyota has, okay, sorry, the question ran away. Good. Publishers like Mkuki Nanyota have sterlingly resisted dependency on government spending, but even they rely, though to a limited extent, on institutional buying, including school, university, and public libraries that are governed by state policy. To what extent has policy enabled or disabled local publishing? Do you want me to repeat that, Walter?
No, I think I got them.
Okay, that's fine.
I got them.
Okay.
Well, in respect of the first one, obviously audio books will come into Africa. But let me tell you something about these audio things, and because I just discovered them myself and I'm having a good time listening to some love stories from Italy, 500 years ago and so on. There's so much free of that, at least in the English language, that with many of the people who use the internet wanting free access to things, I'm not sure how we are going to be able to succeed unless we really are able to bring out extremely good books in Swahili or other local languages. And I think that's where we are likely to succeed. But those who are able to speak English, I'm afraid we probably will not have them, because there's so much free and actually good stuff also. And I'm not sure that we'll be able to compete with those. That's one point. Brian, first of all, how the hell are you? Gosh, woo. It's been a long time, Brian. One of the problems of publishers is that one, some of them don't keep in touch. Well, anyhow, institutional buying, of course, yes, we do benefit from institutional buying, although I can tell you, I don't think the libraries in Tanzania have bought a single book from our company for ages now. And if they did, it was just a few little books, because they are not even funded for new acquisitions. They're funded only to basically to be there, to just pay salaries, and the library has just become a good reading place for secondary school kids, because their homes don't have the kind of good conditions that the public library in Dar es Salaam has. But as far as being called a serious library is concerned, I'm afraid it doesn't have money to buy books. But absolutely, and I think that there's nothing wrong with institutional buying. And of course, we try to take advantage of every possible source of revenue we can get. I mean, this is guerrilla warfare, my friend. Every opportunity has to be taken. If we can sell to institutions, that's very good. But policy, there's really no policy about books in Tanzania. You know, we have been working on this for ages. There's no such a thing. What is there is now that government policy that decided to monopolize again textbook publishing, basically killing off local publishers. So the policy environment it's absolutely important. And if we are catching hell, if these institutions are developing, let us face it, the state has a big part to play. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Walter. There's another question for you in the chat that says, any thoughts on self-publishing online for academics? Is it one of the new ways to go? What do you think?
It's one of the new ways to be exploited, I can tell you that. All these Africans running into these little unknown places in UK and America and publishing their stuff there. They ask you to pay $2,000 and they give you, I don't know how many, 400 books. And then if you want to buy your own books, you find that the books cost more than you can afford. And in my view, this is just another way of copyright piracy, and in a very clever way, because once they take those books and make them their own, these the African authors, as I say, will not be able to actually buy the books, let alone the market in Africa. Those people just produce the books and that's it. But they're accumulating content. They are accumulating content in raw form, because most of it is not edited. So here, 50 years from now, they'll have a lot of content that will not be in Africa, will be abroad, because that's the way these young publishers also think they can go. Now, having said that, let me also be fair that, well, if the young authors can't find publishers, and there are too few publishers handling this work, what do? They want to be published. The technology exists to have the books done. The books are not edited, unfortunately, but, well, some of them can actually get edited if they know, but most of the time they don't know. So the problem replicates itself. I think there's of course the problem that everybody thinks their work is, is the best there is, so they want to be published. They want to publish. Everybody wants to be published, and the technology does make it possible. Yes, in fact, let me also admit that we are doing some of this for some authors with our print on demand. They don't have a lot of money, but they come to us. Now we give them two conditions. If you want us to just print and give you the books, that's fine. That will be not that our name will not appear on the book. But if they accept that we'll get the books edited, properly edited, and then printed on demand for them, if they also wish to have our imprint on the books, and they tend to do, because Book na Nyota now is a good name to have on your book, we will be happy to do that. So it's all work in progress. It's experimentation, what works. But the good thing is that there is a lot of writing, not very, very high quality. And who said life is about high quality? Life is about quality that's consumable. And so that's it.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Walter. There's a comment in the chat for you.
Yes, I don't see this chat business,
No, don't worry. I will read them out to you.
Okay, all right. I'm
So,
still glad I did this. Yeah? Right.
It's perfectly fine. So there's a comment in the chat that says, can Walter speak to the challenges of book distribution and circulation across African borders, how to address this and how to deal with this, and how to deal with the political constraints? And before you answer that one, I'd like to, everybody, like for everyone in the room, we're going to extend by just 10 to 15 minutes just to wrap up the questions and the comments from the rich presentation of Walter. Please kindly extend us your 15 minutes. You're free to leave the room, but if you want to continue, you can stay. We're just adding just 10 to 15 minutes. And then I give it back to you, Walter. Please, can you comment on book distribution, circulation across borders, and how to address? And I will also ask my question. That's the first one. And then let me add my question so that you comment collectively. You talked about cooperation between publishers in Africa, that it's very minimum and very little. Is it something that Mkuki na Nyota has tried over the years, and how successful has that been, if you did? Or what were the challenges in trying to map that out? I'm sure there are publishers in the room that will probably want to know how or if to do that, and what are the prospects in collaboration?
Okay. Was the first one?
Sorry. Okay. The first one is book distribution.
Okay, fine. That's
across borders.
I get it. I get it. Well, book distribution again, across borders is really, really one hell of a problem. We still haven't worked it out even in East Africa, where we have been together for decades, East African cooperation and so on, because each country now is taking different policies. Kenya has 16% VAT on books, and our books in Tanzania already go higher in price compared to Kenya. So if you add 16% of VAT, it's impossible for us to do business in Kenya. And then the reason why we are overpriced in Tanzania is because of low print runs, low readership. It's better in Kenya, so they're able to produce in bigger quantities and sell at slightly lower prices. But I think there is also a kind of tradition that every publisher basically starts with publishing for their own society, their own area. I think this idea of overseas markets was a colonial construct, and it worked very well for the British and still goes on, the so-called traditional markets. But there is this idea that you first of all sell to your market. Now, we are trying to break into this, and my own work, setting up the ABC, supporting ABC and so on, has been one of getting books from Africa going to Africa. But let me just give you an example. And trust me, I don't want to avoid a Pandora box. But the efforts I've spent to try and get a distributor in South Africa over the years are so incredible that I've even stopped trying. Okay? Where I have offered South African booksellers prices that are certainly 30% lower than prices from ABC, but they prefer to buy the books from ABC at 30% or even more expensive, because I don't believe books come anywhere in Africa north of Limpopo, the bums. This is it. It's try to get over that. This how many years South Africa has been free, from 1994 to now. Of course, they should have become over it, but no, they haven't come over it. There is that, but there are also issues of transport, because you have to go by air, and air transport is very expensive. In some countries, if you take books, those books will never get there. If they get in the port, they will disappear. And so these are issues that we've been grappling with over the years. And in fact, one of the justifications for print on demand, the Espresso book machine, was that rather than export books, we would just export PDFs to be printed on the other side. And that would help, go around these problems of borders. So I was involved in a study of establishing in 1990, actually, even before South Africa fully opened up, about setting up a consortium of South African presses, and SADC regional publishing. It didn't work, and one of the things which I make in my presentation is that if you do not have common curricula, and every country and every university does its own procurement of books, even procuring books from overseas, if they could consolidate, they would still get the better deals and cheaper. They don't do, because there's just simply no coordination. And unfortunately, as I said, many of these people running these universities are not interested in finding solutions to these problems. And just point blank, many of them are paid off by these conglomerates, So why we go around about beating about the bush? It's just simple. They get cuts, and cuts on some kind of money. You know what? There's a big money in these books from coming from Europe and America to African universities. So if you get your 5-10% cut, you got it made. Why do you want this trouble of Africans buying other Africans' books? No, we have to deal with that, and it's a serious constraint. But I believe that every constraint inevitably finds a solution to the constraint. So we keep on struggling, and when we make some inroads, we were able, for instance, at some point there was a bus which was Dar es Salaam Johannesburg bus. Mm-hmm. Now we thought this fantastic, because then we can put the books on a bus in Dar es Salaam, and less than 48 hours later, they would be in Joburg, and then you could distribute from Joburg. But I didn't have any taker in Joburg. And then, of course, the bus system collapsed. The bus is no longer going, but maybe it will start again after this COVID business comes to an end, if it does come to an end, that is. And your question was?
Have you tried collaboration with
yes,
other?
Well, I think I've answered it. We have tried collaboration. Certainly, we have tried collaboration. I don't think it's we have done maybe enough. I think one of the things that I am impressed with, and we are grappling with it now, is trying to really work this IT in helping us to distribute books and we are now exploiting social media to get our books known and so on. So we want to see if we can, for instance, we are already selling from the website in Tanzania. We hope we can do that to sell directly to other countries in the neighborhood. And then there are all kinds of ideas about using artificial intelligence to work out how to inform people quickly and fast and so on and so forth. And yes, we are learning. That is costly. And that's where, if I had money, yes, if my friend gave me the money, I would invest, like I said, in a state-of-the-art technology. And that will be very useful. So we are working out solutions. And by the way, I am slowly working myself out of my job and letting my son take over. He's more savvy on these things. And so maybe the publishing house for the first year will be more technically, technologically advanced, and we can see where that takes us. But let me also keep saying, technology only solves problems that are created by people. So the people must be the ones who solve the problems. Technology only helps them, facilitates bringing about solutions. It does not change people's attitudes. Oh, well, maybe it does, but we shouldn't be waiting to solve our problems just because we can't think big enough.
I hope technology solves the problem of encouraging people to read, at least stimulating demand. Like just to read, because there's low demand. So if people then read,
Yes.
maybe technology can facilitate that.
Yeah, no, well, facilitate can, but you see, the point is, the issue is getting books to children at the very start of life, so to speak. That's how you do it. That's not technology. That's parents, that's communities, that's schools. That is also publishers. And for example, we just last week, we are now going and having going to communities and doing children readings and so on. And the response of the children is fantastic. Now, if you catch them that early, you are creating a reading public. Otherwise, the technology that you get to read here is a technology that leads to some kind of weird reading, and I'm not sure that that's what we want to encourage. Yes, naturally, there are some people who will think now, even for example, that the mobile phone has been teaching people how to read and write much more than maybe regular classes, because the person in the village somehow learns quickly how to read if they want to read how to send some money online, to receive money online. They know how to read very quickly. So that helps. In that sense, technology helps.
Thank you, Walter. There's one, I think, if there's nobody raising their hand, there's only one last question in the chat. So I will ask you to answer this, and and you say your closing remarks. But before I read the question, there's a comment from Irene Stoughton. She says she wants to greet you, and she says, "How are you, Walter and Brian? We missed the book phase." That's from them. And the last question, if there's nobody with a question. Okay, so the two last questions. One is, how does one become a publisher? That's the first one. And then the second question is, decolonization has become fashionable. Should we be concerned? And what does it mean to decolonize publishing? I'll say the second one again. Decolonization has become fashionable. Should we be concerned? And what does it mean to decolonize publishing? These are the last two questions for you, Walter.
Well, I send my love to Irene Staunton. And yes, I miss the book fairs. Absolutely, we all miss the book fairs. And we miss also the dancing at her place. You know, Brian is laughing because he knows. So yeah, but you know, these words, decolonizing and so on, at some point may sound like, well, just words. They're not just words, they're very serious ideas and concepts. Let me put it this way.
Okay.
If I were to constantly think about sorry, I don't know how to work these things in a place, but just bear with me, they will cut off.
Okay.
So what are the colonial constructs? We just told you, most of the books being consumed in Africa are not from Africa. The languages that are used to teach our people are not African languages. And so our languages are not developing. We're assuming that all our populations are going to speak English or French or whatever, not realizing that this is absolutely not possible. And if it were possible, it would be disaster, because we would have lost ourselves, okay? We have been subsumed as kind of weird English people or whatever, I don't know. So to decolonize means to become ourselves, okay? To return to the source, to who we are, and to define ourselves, who we are. Now, I'm not into this this incredible thing that ran amok at some point, identity, my identity, this and that. It went completely berserk. Okay, I am an African, okay? So this is one thing we must understand and accept and work to realize. And what does it mean to be? It means to look at our own value systems, our own culture. This not means to exclude important knowledge or whatever we can get from outside. But we want, just as we take, we want just others to take from us, that for us to give. And we can only give if we think for ourselves. If we create for ourselves, if in other words, the locus of our thinking is our interests, African interests. Look at the past to see what went wrong. Rehabilitating Africa from the ravages of slavery, of colonialism, and by struggling against imperialism, that's right here today. That's it. You know, now, you people who are doing research will have very beautiful words to say about this one thing, that what somebody has called the unintelligibility of intellectual work, which now seems to be the conditions for acceptance of great work. In other words, if people don't understand it, that's a very good work. Well, you know, you can get lost in that. But our reality is there. You see, go to the village, see us, see how we mimic the West, how we abandon our own values. I've been trying to grapple with your Afropolitan idea. I'm trying to understand it, you know. But it's interesting, but it's fraught also with a whole lot of questions. So, you know, I was asked to talk about publishing, and now you guys are bringing me into all kinds of things, you know, that, you know. All I'm really saying is that we have a responsibility to our continent, to our people, to become who we want to become, not what others want to make us to become. Maybe that can answer the question.
Thank you very much, Walter. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for an extremely exciting session and very eye-opening. There's so much praise for you in the chat. I'll just read out just one or two for you. I am sorry if I'm going to pronounce your name wrong. Please forgive me.
It's okay.
Yeah, no, for the people that wrote in the chat, I'm really sorry if I'm going to pronounce your name wrong. Suleiman Adewal, okay, I'm sorry, Suleiman. He says, greetings, Walter. Send my best wishes to Nkuki. You are a dynamic, creative mind. You have a dynamic, creative mind to take over. That's one. And I think Elizabeth, it should be Elizabeth Leroux, says, thank you very much for the presentation, taking for your wisdom. And Wangui Wagoro says, wonderful, thank you, Walter. And okay, for everybody in the room, we're gonna, like when we stop the recording, we're gonna open up the chat, then you can interact with Walter. Then you don't have to type it in the chat, you can actually tell him yourself. Thank you very, very much. I'm humbled by your wisdom. Thank you for sharing your insights over the past 49 years. For me, it was a very rich conversation. I actually gained a lot as a very young scholar from, especially the last part when you said, what does it really mean to decolonize? It means to return to self, return to your values, don't just be a giver, like don't be a taker, be also a giver. That actually meant quite significant stuff, not just intellectually. Thank you for that. I would like to thank everybody for coming. Thank you so much for participating. Thank you for all the publishers in the room that came, people from our upcoming speakers also came, and the team from UMA, some of our advisory board members. Thank you for coming. We really appreciate your support. And I'd like to invite you. Tomorrow we have a seminar, a doctoral seminar. You can disseminate it in your contacts. We have a doctoral seminar, same time, 4 to 5. And you can keep an eye out for communication in the chat. You can follow us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter for our other sessions that we conduct as UMA from Monday to Thursday. And our next session is on the 17th of August. I'll ask Ibrahima to unmute himself. He can tell us who the next, because I will pronounce it wrong, it's a French name. I couldn't really say it. So I'll ask Ibrahim to unmute and tell us who the French speaker is on the 17th of August. And I'm inviting you to be a part of it.
Okay, so our next guest will be Badon Doi.
Thank you. So follow us on the 17th, and we can glean into Badon's wisdom and also how to come up with new solutions or solutions to better scholarly publishing in the African continent. Thank you very much for your time.